this thing on? Good morning. Hey, everybody, and welcome to CWAP, Coffee with a Pastor. How's your Thursday? Had to think of what day it is. All the days run together. Not only are we on crazy quarantine time, we are on summertime. Hey, Aurelia. What's up, George? Glad y'all are here. Who else we got? It says 3 people. Maybe I'm one of them. I don't know. Oh, it's supposed to be coffee with a pastor, but I've got nothing to drink here. Hold on. There we go. Got some water. Maybe it's bad luck to do coffee with a pastor with a cup full of water. It's like, toasting with water. Does it help? I've got Lego Batman. By the way, if you haven't seen the Lego Batman movie, absolutely a must-watch for any person, any age. It doesn't matter. Very quotable, funny movie. It's become like quotes from that movie are just part of the daily vocabulary and lexicon of our home, of our family, along with also Lego Ninjago. You have to see Lego Ninjago with Garmadon. We quote Garmadon all the time around here. He's hilarious. What are the other Lego movies that we quote a lot? I mean, Lego Movie and Lego Movie 2, but they're not as good as Lego Batman and Ninjago. Aren't there others? No. The kids say no. Anyways, you got to watch the Lego Batman, Lego Ninjago. Incredibly quotable. Oh, hey, we got more people. Hey, Clark. Hey, Levi Bond. Dear friend of mine from college. Same college. We were in the same fraternity. We had the same undergrad major of financial planning. Little known fact maybe about some of y'all that I have a financial planning background. And then, so our now wives, they were actually friends and roommates in college. And not only that, but they both were in PT school together. And so we love the bonds. We actually have, and they still live in Lubbock. God bless them. No offense to Lubbock. It's God's country, right? And so we'll get to hang out with them some in a little bit. Hey, Tori. Hey, Eric. What's up, John? Good to see you, man. So, oh my God, we're 3 minutes into this thing. Let's get going. So I wanted to talk this morning about, as you saw in how I set this thing up, the Poor People's Campaign. So Reverend Doctor, and I always like to say Reverend because he was a Baptist pastor, but Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., before he was murdered, he was in the midst of shifting to kind of a phase 2 or a part 2, not to leave behind civil rights, but to add to it this bigger picture of human rights. And he was shifting toward this Poor People's Campaign, this multi-class, multi-race effort to really draw attention to the economics of racism, the economics of poverty, just the whole economic piece, and bringing together this multi-class, race coalition. If you've studied the history of racism in our country, then you'll know one of the ways to do that, by the way, is to listen to the Seeing White podcast that friend Aurelia and I talk about all the time. But you'll know that racism has been a tool to divide basically the middle and lower classes and keep them at odds with one another, white against black. And that's a huge oversimplification, but it's true. If we can keep white against black against each other, or white people and people of color against each other, then we can keep them from having any sense of class solidarity and really bringing about meaningful change that benefits most of the people, if not all the people in our society. And so Dr. King was about the work and really shifting his focus and his effort to building that multi-class coalition of solidarity, of people coming together. He had begun that work, he was murdered, and others have continued that work for him. One of the people that has continued that work for him is Reverend Dr. William Barber. And he's doing a lot of work with the group called the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. I put the link to their website in there. They have this event this weekend that I cannot encourage you enough to try to be a part of it in any way you can. They're calling it a National March on Washington, but they're broadcasting this, and you can dial in. They have an opportunity to dial in or dial in. Use your rotary phone and dial into. Anyways, they have 3 opportunities for you to participate in it from your own home. You can do it Saturday morning, Saturday evening, or Sunday evening. I believe the times listed are all Eastern times, so just be aware of that. Hey, Fran. Hey, Tiffany. But so take a look at those links later on after we get off of here. And I cannot encourage you enough to be a part of this organization. I've been following what they're doing for a couple of years now, and I'm hoping to get more involved myself. And it's because the economics matter. We need to be learning more about the economics of poverty. We need to be advocating more for reform of the economics behind our system. And this is a big part of the defund the police movement. It's about, let's go after the economics, because it's the dollars that determine everything. And so people with the defund police movement, some of them at least, are saying all of those resources that we're putting there, what if instead we allocated those toward social determinants of health, like education, healthcare, strong local communities, these kinds of things? Maybe then we would need less police support if we allocated the money differently. So one of the things I wanted to use our time for this morning is to just talk through some of the points in this document that that this organization put out, the Poor People's Campaign put out a couple of years ago. This is from April 2018. It's a really good document, The Souls of Poor Folk. It's like a 130-page, really well-written document with a lot of data in it, written very well. And I just want to talk through a few pieces of the executive summary to give you an idea of some of their beliefs for the Poor People's Campaign. Again, I encourage everybody to be a part of this organization. If you're looking for a way to stay abreast and be involved and get plugged in to this movement that's going on society and worldwide right now, take a look at the Poor People's Campaign. They begin this executive summary of the document just real quick, laying out and talking about 2 myths. The first myth is that poverty is the fault of the poor. This has been enduring forever, but certainly in our society, our 400 years of being around, we have always blamed the poor for their own poverty, and this is a myth that will not die. And if you listen to any news program today, if you read something from 400 years ago, that myth continues to get repeated. It's really the poor's fault, is what they say. It's because they're lazy. It's because they're not creative enough. It's not because of the system. Don't look at the system. Don't look over here at the structural inequities that we have built in. That's not why. It's because the poor are lazy. They don't take care of their stuff. They don't want to work, blah, 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 blah. It's these myths. We blame poverty on the poor rather than looking at the system. And the second myth they lay out is, despite our nation's abundance, there's not enough for us all. It's this myth of scarcity and this scarcity mindset. So don't go trying to change things. You know, we've really already optimized it to be as good as it can be based on our very limited finite resources. Well, I do happen to believe we have finite resources, but I happen to believe that these are largely misallocated currently. And the scarcity mindset is being used to keep us from making any real systemic structural changes. And we talk a lot about the scarcity mindset around here at Peace. Let me real quick just walk through a few of the key findings that they put into this document. I encourage you to read the whole thing, or at least read the executive summary. First, they begin with systemic racism. And they say that legislative actions and legal decisions at the federal and state levels have severely restricted the ability of people of color to participate in the democratic processes. I agree with that. They say that tough on crime politics has led to increased policing of poor communities and a tenfold increase in annual federal discretionary spending on prisons since 1976. If you haven't watched the Netflix documentary 13th, go read that, because that's a deeper dive into all of this. But essentially, we have a prison industrial complex. That's a significant part of our economy. Again, follow the dollars, and you'll see that this is a money-making enterprise now for our society. The prison population in 1968 was 187,000. In 2016, it was 1.458 million. It's much higher today, even 4 years later. So follow the dollars, the prison industrial complex. It's one of the things that the Poor People's Campaign stands against. They say that federal spending on immigration, deportation, and border policies has increased from $2 billion to $17 billion, and deportations has increased tenfold. They want to draw attention to that. They want to talk about poverty. Poverty, this next section. Restrictions on democratic participation are compounded by structural changes in employment toward a low-wage economy, and tied to a decline in union membership. We talk about this today as the gig economy. We talk about this as this race to the bottom in terms of buying labor or labor arbitrage. And this is why so many of our, Lyle agrees, follow the dollars, so many of our low-wage jobs, blue-collar jobs have been shipped overseas, and really that has benefited the capital class. That has benefited those who are holding and hoarding a lot of the resources right now, and they have shipped away a lot of these jobs, and it's so hard to be able to live on minimum wage. In fact, you can't, and the labor class is being exploited, which again, that's most of us who sell our labor. That's what I do. I sell my labor. I wanted to read. Between 1973 and 2016, hourly compensation has increased just 12.3%, while productivity has increased 73%. What this means is that most of the gains over the past 40 or 50 years have not gone to those who are actually doing the work. They've gone again to that small, tiny class of capital holders. I don't want this whole thing to be about eat the rich and to be kill the elites. That's not what I'm about. I invite George, Lyle, and others to provide a counterpoint to that. I don't mean to just attack the elites, but I do want to point out that it's the labor class, it's really the bottom 90% of us that have been exploited terribly over the past 40 and 50 years by systemic structural factors in the way we've set up our society. Next point, it says, instead of going to workers, massive gains from economic growth have been going to a smaller and smaller share of society. Since 1968, the top 1% share of national income has nearly doubled, while the wealthiest Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 64% of the U.S. population. Wow. 400 people own more than the bottom 64% of the whole society. Nearly 41 million Americans live below the federal poverty line. In absolute terms, white people made up 42.5% of this population. This is what boggles my mind. White people make up 42.5% of this poor population, the biggest chunk of it, and yet we are incentivized to vote against our own best interest. Narratives are getting in the way of that. What do I want to say? Nearly 140 million people are either poor or low income. 140 million people. We are a society of, say, 350 million. That's my best guess. I think that's about what we are. 140 million of 350 million are either poor or low income. We need systemic structural change. Follow the dollars. Let's learn our economics. Let's do something about this. Almost 4 in 10 children spend at least 1 year of their lives in poverty, meaning that there has been a rise also in the number of poor families. Listen to this one. The scaling back of anti-poverty programs. Did you know this? Starting in the 70s, throughout the 80s and 90s, we have been scaling back anti-poverty programs. And this has had an incredibly detrimental effect. We have been dismantling social safety nets. One of the big times we did that was in 1996. I believe that was under Clinton. So don't think this is just the right that's doing this. Democrats have been doing this as well. Don't be fooled. In 1996, under the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. I'm going to feel stupid if that was actually a different president, but I think it was Clinton. Anyways, they decreased aid to families with dependent children and replaced it with TANF, which drastically reduced how much support can go to poor families. This whole dismantling of this social safety net really hits close to home for me. I was being raised the first 5, 6, 7 years of my life by a single mom that was poor, uneducated, from Arkansas. I think, she finished high school, I believe, and she's raising a handful of kids by herself in Texas. And at that time, in the 80s, Reagan is dismantling social safety nets, dismantling how much like food benefits and things like that poor moms can get. And he's using it under this old straw man trope of the welfare queen, which was disproven. There was no welfare queen, but that's the image he's using to try to fuel his actions. It was Clinton's welfare reform. Thank you, John. Dr. Singletary coming in there. But Reagan did it as well. And the point that has really stuck with me over the past few years as I became aware of this is toward the end of the 80s, my mom gave up and said, I can't raise these kids. There's just no way I can do it. I can't make ends meet. I can't feed them. We are living in a shack. Like, there's just no way I can do it. And she had her own personal problems around using drugs and drug addiction and things like that. But we had criminalized mental health issues, one of which is drug abuse. So there was kind of this dual punch against her of we had criminalized drug use instead of making it a mental health issue. And then we basically said, if you're poor, it's your problem and you just need to work harder, and we're taking away any benefits from the state. And so she gave up in the late 80s, and she took us, my siblings and I, and she dropped us off at my dad's house, an abusive alcoholic. And she said, I can't raise them. I just can't. There's no way I can do it. You have to do it. And I've always wondered, and life was like hell until I turned 18 and said, I'm getting the hell out of here. And I moved away and as far as I could get within Texas to Lubbock, to Texas Tech University. And I've often wondered, I find myself wondering, what if she would have had the support she needed to raise us? What if she would have been able to get the educational support she needed, or childcare, so that she could work, or some kind of livable wage, or whatever it was? How different would my life have been? I'm giving you a personal story here. If she would have had the support she needed, so instead of social safety nets being dismantled for the most vulnerable, if she would have received the support she needed, she wouldn't have dropped us off at our alcoholic dad's house and said, you raise them, I give up. And that's just one story out of millions upon millions of stories. Follow the dollars, follow the dollars, follow the dollars. Side note, in the midst of all these bailouts that are happening right now, follow the dollars, follow the dollars. Housing, higher education, and healthcare costs have skyrocketed. Lyle posted this link above. WTF happened in 1971. I've read that before, and I think one of the charts in there is it shows how education, housing, healthcare, these things have skyrocketed in cost since 1971. Listen to this. Oh my gosh. Over the past 30 years, rents have gone up faster than income in nearly every urban area in the country. In 2016, there was no state or county in the nation where an individual earning the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour could afford a 2-bedroom apartment at market rent. Something is wrong with our system, right? Something is wrong with our system where you can work full time at minimum wage and not be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, you and a kid or kids, in any state or county in our nation. Something is wrong with our economic system. Follow the economics, follow the dollars. This is why Dr. King and this is why Dr. Barber now are bringing a class of people together to say we've got to fix the economics of all this. I agree with them on that. Oh, I could keep going on. Student debt levels have exploded. Health costs have exploded. I appreciate the work that George Brown, who's on this morning, he's a part of where they are exposing how healthcare costs are oppressive. That's a domination system. And then hospital systems are suing their patients to try to recoup some of that money. So I'm really grateful for the work that George is doing with that. A majority of homeless families are headed by single women with young children. America has become a debtor nation. 30% of Black households, 27% of Latinx households, and 14% of white households have zero wealth, or a negative, a negative balance. So 3 in 10 or 1 in 3 Black households have zero wealth. Again, can we blame individuals for that, or do we look at this and go, oh my God, this is a structural issue when 1 in 3 Black households have zero wealth to hand off to the next generation to help them have a leg up, to hand off to the next generation, and so on. They go on to talk about the war economy and militarism. Not only do we have a prison industrial complex, this is getting so long. I'm sorry, look what you do when you get me talking about economics. They go on to talk about not only do we have a prison industrial complex economy, we have a military industrial complex economy. We've known about this now for 70 plus years. We were warned against it, but we haven't really done anything about it. And then they go on to talk about the ecological devastation that follows and really is part of all of this. It was Pope Francis who said that it's the poor who will suffer the most from our ecological devastation. It's the poor of the world who will truly bear the weight and the burden of this. So I cannot encourage you enough, be a part of the Poor People's Campaign. If you can't join in on the event this weekend, at least go to their website and read up a little bit about them. This is a great way to get involved in an organization. Let me read just the last paragraph here of the executive summary. As Reverend Dr. King said in 1967, we must now see that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. They're all one. You can't really get rid of one without getting rid of the other. Today, these evils, along with ecological devastation, have become more and more tightly bound together. They are part of a larger system that has concentrated economic and political power into fewer and fewer hands. I know this is one of the things that my buddy George talks about, is power being concentrated into a very tiny number of hands. We need a decentralized system. We need to share power. That's one of the things we're all about here at Peace, is sharing power. That's built into the very structure of our community, into all of our structures. Okay, this has gone on too long. Have you learned something? I hope I've shared some of my passion with you. I think we can't just be passionate about racism. I think we have to be passionate about the economics behind racism, the economics behind oppression and domination systems. Read some economics, find some good resources. Start with the Poor People's Campaign, led by Dr. Barber, a Black man who is continuing the work of Dr. King. I love you all. There's some great comments here. I'm going to hop off because it's been 25 minutes. Sorry about that, but I love this. I love you all. Let's keep doing hard work. And as I said in my sermon on Sunday, find a way to get plugged in. You find a way. You don't have to do it like me. You don't have to be passionate about economics, but just find a way to get plugged in where you are already. You don't have to use the same lingo as me and check all the same boxes. Get plugged into this anti-racism work. And this is one of the ways that you can do that. I'm just looking at a few comments here. Thanks, Fran, for adding that. Thank you, Lyle, for your stuff. I appreciate all you're doing. I'm hopping off. Happy Thursday.